Deputy Tommy Broughan, please.
Taoiseach, last November you came over to Clongriffin in Dublin Bay North along with Minister Owen Murphy to lay the foundation stone for an 84-unit social housing development for the Ivy Trust. Unfortunately, those 84 welcome new homes we spoke of on that happy occasion, they won't be delivered until Q2 2019. And probably like yourself and many other deputies around the House, every weekend I meet dozens of citizens and families in great anxiety and distress over your government's continuing failure to deliver social and affordable housing. I meet constituents who are up to 12, 14, 16 and even up to 20 years on housing and transfer lists, and some of these are facing eviction from RAS, HAP and rent supplement support tenancies, sometimes on foot of a court order. Other desperate families are approaching 2 years or more in emergency homeless accommodation. It's also very depressing, Taoiseach, that homeless families with young children are still being allocated hotel-type accommodation 8 months after the Taoiseach promised me that practice would cease. Recently I came across 2 young people who were living in a car during the current dreadfully cold weather. Dublin Bay North, as you may know, Taoiseach, comprises the largest Dublin City Council housing area, Area B, and the southern part of the Howth Malahide housing area of Fingal County. The social housing stats prepared by our City and County managers, Mr Owen Keegan and Mr Paul Reid, confirm the sense of hopelessness felt by my constituents in dire need of housing. On the last Dublin City waiting lists and allocations report, there were an astonishing 7,114 families and individuals on homeless housing and transfer lists in Area B out of 27,000 citywide. And in the 2017 Housing Agency Rebuilding Ireland report, even before the numbers of households on the Howth Malahide list are added to the city total, Dublin Bay North had the highest housing waiting list in Ireland, even bigger than the whole of Fingal and South Dublin. Much more shocking is that almost 700 of these individuals and families are homeless and nearly 900 are waiting for more than 10 years, with a further almost 2,500 waiting for over 5 years. Of course, it's not just a problem for Dublin Bay North, as we've heard again today. Taoiseach, I don't doubt the sincerity of Minister Owen Murphy and national and local housing officials, but the above data clearly shows that rebuilding Ireland is not working for our constituents. Over the past decade, yourselves and Fianna Fáil have done everything possible to support a dysfunctional, rigged property market, and at the same time it was your government and Fianna Fáil which cut Dublin and local authority staff by 20 to 35% from 2008. So, Taoiseach, is it not time to abandon your ideological posturing and commit to a massive emergency programme of public, social and affordable housing as advocated by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and its Charter for Housing Rights? Besides the declaration of a national housing and homelessness emergency, that charter demands a referendum on the right to housing to put it into the Constitution, robust legislation on tenants' rights, rents and standards of accommodation, a ban on evictions of citizens and families and children into homelessness, and a land management policy based on the Kenny report and necessary CPOs. These demands, of course, are echoed in the campaign for public housing, which I also support. And as part of this programme, Taoiseach, will you now establish a national social and affordable housing development and construction company, even initially in the Dublin and other urban regions? And I know you were discussing some amendment of NAMA's legislation to permit NAMA to have this function. That seems impossible, but we do need a national effort, Taoiseach, because these figures are disgraceful.
Thank you, Deputy. I don't think anyone in this House doubts the scale of the challenge we face when it comes to housing and homelessness, and I certainly acknowledge the scale of the challenge that we face in relation to housing and homelessness. We are seeing some limited progress. The number of people rough sleeping in the last couple of weeks has gone down as a consequence of the additional bedrooms put in by Minister Murphy before Christmas. The number of families living in B&Bs and hotels is down from its peak, and at least in the last month for which we have records, the number of families in emergency accommodation is down, but that may well just be a seasonal blip, and certainly I wouldn't read into much of it at this stage, but it does indicate some indications of progress, at least in some areas. We shouldn't forget where we're coming from, though, when it comes to the crisis that we face in housing. We had a 7-year period after a very severe economic crisis during which very few homes were built at all. The banks were bust, the construction industry collapsed, and government was not in a position to build new housing because of the fiscal crisis. Yet in that period the population continued to grow and many new households were formed. So we are now playing catch-up. But we are catching up. As I mentioned, the amount of social housing being built by our local authorities is being ramped up. Direct builds of only 657 in 2016, up to 2,245 last year. So a trebling in the number of social homes directly built by our councils and approved housing bodies. And we're also seeing all around us an uptick in construction in the private sector by private developers building their houses. But it is going to take us time before things stabilise, and then time again before we get on top of things. In relation to cutbacks in Dublin City Council, the Deputy mentioned Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. As best I recall, Dublin City Council is not controlled by Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. It's controlled by a coalition of very left-wing groups who do have control over things like the ability to vary property tax, like the ability to vary commercial rates. So any decision to cut back, staffing in those local authorities could have been mitigated by decisions taken by the left-wing councillors on that city council. They chose not to do so.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Broughan.
You slashed our funding, and you voted again and again to keep the funding on Dublin City and Fine Gael as low as it was. People and councillors had no choice. But we need more than empty, Taoiseach. We need action. There is no credible delivery pipeline of social and affordable housing, either in Dublin Bay North or the rest of the country. And the stats for the 2015-17 reports we got recently, they show this. Only 322 direct-built homes were delivered by DCC across the whole city of Dublin in 2015-17. And Fine Gael built only, I think, 7 homes in the period 2010 to 2015, and only 76 in 2016-17. In fact, there are well over 7,000 households also on the Fine Gael housing list, and over 400 homeless families. So it's no wonder, Taoiseach, that the European Commission, in its latest post-programme surveillance report, has severely criticised your flimsy and lethargic housing policies. And of course, the Commission highlighted the almost 20% jump in rents over the crash era peaks and the pathetic trickle of social and affordable housing. And of course, today's Daft.ie report shows that rents in Dublin 13, a key postal district of Dublin Bay North, are in the territory of €1,800 to €2,000 a month. So what chance has a HAP person got? But you're going to spend £1 billion a year from 2019 on HAP, and yourselves and Fianna Fáil, you've spent about £7 billion on these kind of supports over recent years. Why don't you just build houses?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to conclude on this.
Rebuilding Ireland was never supposed to be a plan that was going to work in 6 months or 9 months or just 1 year. It's a multi-annual plan funded over a period of 5 or 6 years. So the whole nature of a plan that is a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan is that it isn't just going to work after 5 months or 6 months or 1 year. But to answer the Deputy's question, why don't you get building? Well, that is exactly what we are doing. Direct builds by local authorities and approved housing bodies, only 650 in 2016, up to 2,245 last year, so more than trebling, and they'll increase again this year. The number of voids brought back into use, 1,757 last year. The number of houses acquired by local authorities, and sometimes it makes sense for local authorities to acquire houses rather than building them from scratch. It's quicker and it helps to develop more integrated communities. 2,266 properties acquired by local authorities last year, up from less than 2,000 the year previously. In addition to that, through leasing, another 798 delivered. So through all sorts of different mechanisms, over 7,000 homes added to our social housing stock last year, which makes a real difference.
Thank you.
Let's not forget, every working day, every single working day, the government, through local authorities and approved housing bodies, houses 100 individuals and their families, and we'll continue to ramp that up. And we'll continue to ramp that up until we get to a point of stability, and then we'll get ahead of it too.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Dr. Mike.